Hi, how are you? Hope you're well. So I'm just doing a quick little check-in because I have officially started Emily Wilde's Compendium of... what's the book's name? I can't check. But the third book in the Emily Wilde series, I did reread book 1 and 2, but I didn't film that since I do have an entire vlog of me reading that on my channel, and I'll link it down below if you want to know my thoughts. But yes, I've started it, and I'm so incredibly nervous because I don't want the series to end. I'm genuinely very, very sad. I've only read about 3 chapters at this point, and to be perfectly honest, this morning was very stressful. I had an entire plan of everything I needed to do today, and then I ended up being given a bunch of research into things that I have to do, which completely threw me off for my day, and it's just been quite stressful. And so as I was listening to the first few chapters, I really didn't pay that much attention. So I'm considering, because it's only 45 minutes, so I'm considering restarting it maybe tomorrow when I'm actually in a headspace to sit and listen to it, or not. I haven't decided fully yet, but I'm probably going to restart it just because I don't want to hate the series because I didn't listen to the first 2 chapters. But I'm very excited. I'm very nervous. Once this is over, I'm going to be very, very sad, but it's also exciting that it's finally going to come to an end. It feels like the end of an era almost. So yes, it's very bittersweet at this point, but this is going to be a spoilered video. We're going to be talking about everything. So I guess let's just go on this journey together. Hi, so first and foremost, I'm sorry for the audio. This is the best that I could do today, and I wanted to give a quick little update, but right now I'm about 44% into Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales, and so far it's been interesting, but the first 20% I was really struggling with. I genuinely thought that this series kind of just fell off because it very much felt like the story was over and we were just pulling a series into a trilogy instead of a duology when it should have been a duology. However, now that more action has started, I do take that back. I just think that the first 3 hours of the audiobook was not as gripping as I would have liked it to be and as book 1 and 2 were, which is unfortunate, but it has picked up and I'm very intrigued now. It was just a slow start because it felt like I said, it felt like the story had ended and we're just following a closed off story, and then we find out no, it wasn't. I'm also very excited because we're seeing old characters from both book 1 and 2, which is so much fun. I love that they're being brought back, and I just love seeing how she went from this recluse to having people that genuinely care about her and that she genuinely cares about. And so even though it was a rough start, I very much fell into it in the second half or the second quarter of the book. And so yes, I'm back to being excited, and I was really worried for a second, but we're doing well. I'm, like I said, almost halfway. I'm 44% in, and I really want to finish it this week. I don't want to drag out the reading experience for this, so hopefully I'll check in a couple of days because I finished, and I'll check in obviously if there are anything else that's noteworthy, but so far that was the only thing. So yeah. Hi, so I officially finished Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries, and I want to cry over the fact that the series is officially over. So I did end up giving this book 4 stars. I am ashamed of myself for having thought that this would be a flop at the beginning, because boy was I wrong. First and foremost, if you have not read this book yet, I do just want to warn you that Heather Fawcett decides to mess with your emotions in this book. So have tissues ready. Be prepared to be emotional because she decided she's gonna fuck with you a little bit. I'm not going to say why or how, because spoilers. However, it's worth it getting through it, obviously. Just, be prepared to be messed with a little bit. And then one thing that is not really about the book's content, but I really love it, is I love how each book follows the seasons. Because to me, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries feels very winterish. Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands feels very spring. And then Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales feels very late spring, early summer, which is nice because I love the idea of reading it with the seasons. I feel like it would just flow very well and beautifully into each other, and I just really like that atmosphere is there. I'm definitely an atmospheric reader. I couldn't see myself reading Once Upon a Broken Heart in the summer. To me, that book is strictly winterish. I know book 3 takes place more so in the summer, but for the entirety of the series, it just feels like a winter read. You Deserve Each Other is another book that is absolutely fantastic to read in the winter time, and I really just love books that you can feel the season, and with these books you really can, and it's truly really wonderful. As I mentioned earlier, this book did start off very slowly for me, and it did have me worried a little bit, and I'm very ashamed of myself for having felt that way. However, I will also very honestly say every book in this series I enjoyed more upon the reread. I don't know what it is about this series, but there's just something about knowing the pacing, knowing the story, and just listening to it again that feels a lot more comforting than the first time. I think because this very largely feels like a fairy tale or a bedtime story, and so it's one of those stories that the more you hear it, the better it gets, as opposed to some books where, especially like mystery thrillers, where the first time you read it and you don't know anything usually is the best time around, because the good parts come from the fact that you don't know the plot twists. And with this book, I do think that when I eventually reread the series, I will enjoy it a lot more, because this to me personally just feels like one of those stories that gets better with rereads. And I will definitely eventually reread this again. I don't think it will be next year, because this year will mark 3 years that I've read every single book that was available to me, and so I do just want to take a 2 to 3 year break before I pick it up again. However, I definitely will be reading it again, and I'm very excited for that day to come. I think some separation will make me just love it even more when I do pick it up again, so it's very exciting nonetheless. So I do think that this book was just the perfect conclusion to the trilogy, and I really loved the ending. I love that the story ends and you see an ending for the characters, but it was written in such a way where you also know what their life looks like beyond the book, what happens after the epilogue. And I felt like the ending was very realistic toward every character, and I really enjoyed how both Emily and Wendell's story arcs concluded. I felt that it made sense for each character, and it was one of those where it's like I couldn't have imagined this book ending differently. And the thing that I just love about the series overall is it's just perfect. There is enough plot to keep you intrigued. There is just the barest hints of romance to like fill your heart with joy, especially because again, this is a romantic fantasy, not a romantasy. So, you know, the romance is very much a C plot in all 3 books, but it's enough and it makes sense. And even with plot twists and even with anxious moments and scary portions for the characters and for the plot, it remains cozy. It's interesting, but it's cozy, and I think that's such a difficult balance to strike, and I just think that the author did so well creating it, because I was interested and I was intrigued and I want to know what happens, and it's enough of a story to keep you reading, but it's cozy enough to the point where if you just need to read something comforting, if you just need to not feel anxious, especially like if you're going through a difficult time in your real life, I think this book is a really great balance of still having intrigue but not feeling as if you're going to have a mental breakdown over these fictional characters. I don't know if I mentioned this, but in this book, characters from both book 1 and book 2 come back, and it was lovely seeing little glimpses of not everyone, but a lot of people. My only complaint is that I wish Poe is in this book a little bit more, because I do think that Poe is probably one of, if not my favorite character from this series, and so seeing more of him would have been lovely. However, this book was truly perfect, and the series is perfect, and if you haven't read it yet, please do. If the writing style does not mesh with you, try the audiobook. The narrator does an absolutely wonderful job at it, and although it might seem boring at first because it's academic journals, it really does get interesting, because I owned the physical when it came out. I read the first 2 chapters, I did not click with it, and then I returned it because I'd only read 2 chapters. I was like, this is not for me. And then 2-3 months later, I picked it up again through audio, and I fell in love with it. So much so to the point that now I own 2 out of the 3 books physically, and I'm definitely going to get the 3rd one as well, and I want to physically read it at some point as well. But I also own all 3 of the audiobooks. So definitely give it a shot. If you don't like it at the halfway point, I would recommend DNFing it, because at that point it's just not the type of story for you. However, if you're looking for something interesting but comforting, this series, truly amazing. And also, if you haven't read it yet at this point, let me just say that this is not interconnected standalones. You need to read book 1, then book 2, then book 3. So please do that. I'm so sad that this book is over, and I'm kind of mourning it a little bit. Like, it's one of those where it's like, I was ready for it to be over, but as soon as I ended it, I was like, what do I do now? What do I read now? How do I cope? If you haven't read it, please go read it. If you have read it, please let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you thought about Heather Fawcett messing with our emotions in regards to some things, but make sure to mark it as spoiler so that people that haven't read it don't get spoiled. If you like me or my videos, I would really appreciate a like, comment, and subscribe if you feel like it. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye.